Let's see. Okay, we're recording, we're live. So this is Talk About It Tuesday podcast, the first episode ever. And we
Woo-hoo.
are, right? And we are with Kevin Sofen, owner of Wristsponsible and the co-host of the SDG Talks podcast, which is fantastic. I've been a guest on it and it was amazing on one of their panels. Thank you so much for joining us, and let's get to it.
Ashley, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Thank you, thank you. I want you to just take this time to introduce yourself and the organization and what you do.
Right on. Yeah, my name's Kevin Sofen, and I live in Chicago, Illinois, but I'm originally from Los Angeles, California, and then spent my summers and went to a school in Madison, Wisconsin, and overall in the state of Wisconsin, and now live in Chicago. So I've kind of always been in and around water, Pacific Ocean, Lake Mendota, Lake Michigan. I've always just had this passion and calling for water. And within my day job, the company I work for, Darley, we do a lot of different pumps and trucks and different water solutions. And I helped commercialize different water purification solutions throughout time, but quickly realized that within the humanitarian and developing worlds, many of the people that need the water solutions can't afford the water solutions. So we needed to find ways to raise the capital to implement those water solutions. And I hosted 2 charity golf tournaments in 2015 and 16, raised over $50,000 to $75,000 to implement these water systems in Nepal, solar and wind powered water treatment systems at hospitals. And it was a great experience, but I don't know if anyone else has hosted a live event, a charity golf tournament. It's very stressful. It can rain and all of a sudden your plans are ruined. But nonetheless, we raised the money, and then I wanted to try and find a way to have an ongoing fundraiser for these water initiatives. And so when I was in Nepal, I met this one artisan that makes these handcrafted wristbands. They're kind of like friendship bracelets. But now I buy them from a network of artisans, import them, sell them, and then reinvest the profits into grassroots water projects. And that's something now with the bands we've sold and other private foundations we partner with. We've now contributed upwards of $400,000 towards different grassroots water initiatives around the world, completing over 25 different projects in places like Nepal, Rwanda, Tanzania, Peru, Mexico, Flint, Michigan. And within that, I just touched on the other SDG stuff quickly. I went to a United Nations Innovation Lab in 2019, right when this COVID-19 thing was brewing up before we really even knew it. And after that event, it was an amazing experience. I got to dive in deep to SDG 6, clean water and sanitation. But from that, wanted to sort of challenge everyone saying, hey, this event was great, but what are we doing after the fact? You know, we would get together and shake hands, kiss babies. Hey, look at all this amazing stuff we're doing. But like, I'm always a big believer and thinker of what action are we actually taking after said event? And so I wanted to create a podcast that helped further communicate and deliver on best practices and awareness around all things sustainable development goals. And so we launched the SDG Talks podcast. My co-host and I, James, we now post 8 podcasts a month, host 1 webinar roundtable a month. We have one this Friday on gender equality, SDG 5, and really just sort of a network to raise awareness on the SDGs. I can talk more about it, but they're over my shoulder here. I live in SDG 6 silo, which is very much water, but all of these SDGs are important. To many people, whatever they're focused on is most important, but we can't think of development in enterprise and improvement in silos. Water is connected to education. Education is connected to power.
Right.
Food is connected to job opportunity. Climate change is connected to the health and life of the ocean. They're all interconnected, so it's good to define them, but they're so different, and that's kind of why I have this podcast. And I could go a mile deep in all of them, which we do, and it's a passion of mine and James, and we're here to just talk SDGs with you anytime, anywhere, any day.
And that's why I love you guys. You have brought so much knowledge to this world. You obviously, a lot of people are not really sure what SDGs are, and they're kind of confused on the concept. Can you just give us a good overall on what these are? Because you said a lot, and I just want our viewers and our listeners to understand exactly how important these are and what we're all striving for with these SDGs.
Definitely. And I apologize. Sometimes when I'm
Oh,
on a heater, I'm just talking too fast and getting after it. But yeah, there was the initial United Nations put together the Millennial Development Goals, I think back in the 90s at some point, and then that was just setting the framework on these different problems that we have in the world and identifying them into sort of definable goals. And then in 2015, at the Paris Climate conference, as well as sort of leading up to that, the United Nations came up with the new 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which are over my shoulder. And you can type in UN SDGs in Google and find it, but I'll read through them quickly. It's no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable energy and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, innovation, industry and infrastructure, reduce inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice, and strong institutions, and partnerships for the goals. There's a lot of words in there. If you look at my shoulder, there's a lot of colors, but really these are sort of meant to define these broad, complex, difficult problems and put them into a context that we can conceptualize, and we can start to think about how does clean water sanitation relate to clean power, and what are things we could do to address multiple SDGs to try and raise up the poverty, reduce the poverty levels, continue to provide the basic necessities that humans need across the board. And there's so much within each of them, but it's just the SDGs are a good framework to consider if you're thinking about getting into sustainability and development. And there's a lot of traction in the space, and it's a very growing niche audience of people focused on sustainability.
yeah, definitely. You actually turned me on to them, and I love that community. I also just love, I could kind of explain it that it's just a broad spectrum of things that we all need to focus on to transform the culture of consumption, right? To
Yep.
transform this whole world that we have of just this linear system
Yep.
drops off at the end. So it's really just a recap and major 17 points to focus on that can actually bring about a sustainable world, meaning everyone's living well together and balanced with the earth.
Yep.
That's
And I'm actually reading this book right now that I'm turning into some of my curriculum called Donut Economics. And it's all about living within the confines of the resources of our world, where humans, we need enough to live, but we don't need, if we try and live without our means, then all of a sudden we have the destruction of the earth.
yep.
And so it's finding that sweet spot based on what does everyone actually need and what does the world actually have to be able to provide to us. And then that gets into, is there a carrying capacity of the world? Is there a certain population that we can or cannot sustain? Are certain institutions set up to just focus on extraction and GDP, gross domestic product, as opposed to focus on circularity of cradle to grave of products? And
Right.
there's so much baked into that, and we need to just continue to talk about it and dive head in every moment of every day, because every moment we're wasting time. And I think I've heard this phrase with the recent election that, especially right now, looking at these next 50 years, even these next 10 years, history will look back on us. We've had incredible industrial revolution, and the world from 1850 till now has had incredible development in health and transportation and business and all these different economic opportunities. But it's also at what cost, and what's the point of it all? And I think now we want to look at hopefully reevaluating, not trying to live in opposition with the world, but trying to live with the world.
Yes, 100%. And these SDGs are what focus that and what brings it together. I love that. So you talked about grassroots water projects. Can you break this down for us? And why is this so important for sustainability as a whole?
Yeah, I think grassroots everything is important, because a lot of times you'll see a politician or some person in government that wants to make their stamp on their time on office, and they're like, you know what? We're going to build a bridge. We're going to build this enormous tunnel or do some big infrastructure project, which is big, big, big. And that's something, you can put a plaque on, you can put a statue on. But a lot of times, a big project like that displaces a lot of people, isn't really designed 100% correctly, is not really considering the local dynamics. And while it may cause some positive benefits in certain areas, you're causing a lot of negative externalities elsewhere.
Mm.
So my belief at Responsible, as well as all the different work we do, is focusing on grassroots solutions. So what does that mean? It's working with the local community. I'm from Chicago, and for example, I do projects in Flint. I'm not even just between Illinois and Michigan. There's a huge difference in terms of what's the cultural dynamic, what's the historical dynamic, what's the social dynamic, what's the economic dynamic. You think about just California, NorCal to SoCal. How
Right.
different is it? And even Central California is at least 3 states, and you have to really work with local community leaders. So a lot of times within the projects we do is faith-based leaders. It's sort of healthcare centers. It is childcare centers. Those are the groups that are some type of form of institution that has some level of power in terms of more influence.
Mm.
And so we work with them, understand what is your problem. And once we really understand the problem, we can reverse engineer a solution to actually bring the proper technology that's needed. And I mean, one example in my life where I went into, it was a project we did in 2015. We wanted to raise 25K to do a solar and wind powered water treatment system in the Navajo Nation to bring safe water to the community. And we were doing it and pushing and pushing it. And then after about 2 months, we realized they actually had water. They had these rainwater storage tanks and they got delivered. What they really needed was food. So then we pivoted after conversations and worked to implement permaculture farms. So we created and developed the resources needed to be able to turn, I think, 3 or 4 acres of land into permaculture farm where it was starting to capture the rainwater. They're planting different seeds and different high produce greens, and now it's an ongoing sustainable farm that's producing different types of protein, and that's sort of the case all over where, as opposed to sprinting to implement something, and often you see in Africa thousands of wells that are just not working and broken. Instead, it's best to actually have conversations on the ground first. I think the
Mhm.
other phrase I've heard is whatever, measure twice, cut once. It's
Right.
definitely good to ask all the questions and then do the work. Even though I'm all about speed and go faster, but it definitely helps to have those grassroots conversations so you're not trying to shove a square peg in a circle hole.
Yes, 100%. And I think it's super important to look at the atmosphere that's around that certain area because everything's going to be different. Every area is going to be different. And exactly what you said, we just need to focus on that local community and help what's going on there because they already have something in place, that atmosphere, that biosphere, everything is already working in that location how it's supposed to. So we need to work off of that. So yeah, definitely that grassroots concept.
Yeah, and what works in Peru isn't what necessarily works in Rwanda. And what works in
100%.
Flint isn't what necessarily works in San Diego. I mean, it's
Yep.
different, and that's fine. So it's just a matter of tailoring that ideal solution for that local need.
Yep. Like you said, climate, everything about that general location is going to be different. And
Definitely.
so that's, it's their like microclimate of that area.
Yep.
And you have to change that microclimate. You can't just focus on the whole thing. And you can,
100%.
and if you do something that doesn't work in that microclimate and it comes from somewhere else, that's going to destroy that area. So,
Yeah, you see a lot of times of groups with good intentions coming in, but causing more harm. I don't know if any of maybe your listeners or you have ever seen the documentary called Disaster Capitalism, and it just focuses on Haiti. And Haiti is unfortunately just like a bad decision after another bad decision after another bad decision, causing just a lot of inequalities there that were the basis of aspects of colonialization, basis of greed, basis of post neo-colonialization, and
mm,
just different things from cutting down all the trees for the lumber industry and going over the carrying capacity, killing all the topsoil, and then trying to do all these different things to cause incentives for farmers to do different acts, and then it just leading to all these failures and these loans not being able to be repaid, and then charities coming in to try and fix the problem and only creating more dependency.
yep.
um, yeah, it's an interesting, unfortunate case study.
That's awesome. What was it called again?
Disaster Capitalism. Maybe
Disaster.
it's called Disaster Inc. Disaster Inc. I think is what it's called. Yeah.
Okay, Disaster Inc. or Disaster Capital, either one.
Yeah. Yep.
Awesome. That is so good to know. Yeah, I haven't seen that one, but I'm definitely going to have to check that out for sure. But that happens everywhere. It's not, it's not just in Haiti. That happens with every industry and every location that's trying to change what's already working.
Yep.
Yep.
100%.
Are you looking it up?
I'm trying to find it now. Yeah, it's
Awesome.
I think it is called Disaster Capital. There might be a few, but you get the point.
Either one, you're going to find it and it's going to be good information.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I want to go back a little bit and just talk about what are the most important ones of the SDGs to talk about and focus on. Or do you think that this is simply on, we all have to focus on our individual ones?
Yeah, I mean, it totally depends on who you're talking to.
Hmm.
And I live in SDG 6 a lot within the Clean Water and Sanitation. My favorite one has recently become SDG 17, Partnership for the Goals.
Hmm.
Because really, in my mind, across SDGs 1 to 16, everything that you do requires partnership from a local level to a state level to a federal level to a business to a nonprofit to individual to individual. It's all people to people, and that's something to me is emblematic in all the SDGs. We've now done 3 webinars, or at least our first one was on SDG 12, responsible consumption and production around sustainable fashion. We did one on sustainable tourism, and tourism kind of falls into SDG 8, economic growth, as well as reducing inequalities, SDG 10. So everything sort of overlaps, and I think often we want to try and define a problem, and SDGs kind of do that, but nothing lives in a silo. They're all these issues are connected. Granted, you got to start somewhere, and you got to start working on a project or initiative, and you can't just be like, hey, we're going to solve all 17 SDGs tomorrow, write a check, make it happen. Like, it's not how that works. It takes partnership and planning and goals. So they're all vitally important, and it's not, there's no silo amongst all of them. They're nice little colors you can see over my shoulder, but they're all interconnected, and it's important to appreciate all of them as you're approaching a solution. Think about by trying to reduce the impact of sustainable fashion, you're trying to reduce fast fashion. Like, how does that impact the amount of energy that required? How does it impact the amount of wastewater that was produced? How does that impact, even though it sounds bad, how does that impact the jobs of people who were maybe working in a sweatshop? But how can this now be something that's made in a place that's providing fair labor, but still providing jobs? And they always kind of think about, when you do something somewhere, there's going to be some positive or negative externality. And I think that's something that I've learned too in water, where we've had situations where we implement a new water system that's selling water below the cost of bottled water.
Hmm.
But a lot of these places like Mexico City and other places around the world, the water mafia is no joke. There's
Right.
serious people who are making money selling water in an existing method. And when you disrupt the status quo, you make people upset. And when you make people upset, you have the risk of having a confrontation. So when you do something to change the status quo, you are going to step on someone's toes. So I think you just have to be mindful of that, and obviously just be careful, but also don't be afraid to be the one that's stirring the pot to change things up. Because one phrase I hate that is so emblematic across our society is, that's just the way it's always been. And I'm just like, F that. Like, couldn't be more of an old school, terrible way of thinking. And just because that's the way it's always been doesn't mean it's the right way. So
Right.
it's good to question and challenge things, but obviously doing it with as responsibly as possible and thought out and working with the right partners.
Yeah, definitely. And seeing past what you're going to do and what's actually going to happen to the environment around that project.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so much that needs to be done, and the
Yeah.
projects the projects can be simple. Sometimes it can just be, hey, encourage your community to pick up pieces of trash and
Right.
put a smile on your face and pick it up, or then you're talking about an awareness campaign or some type of fundraising campaign to do a project. So And that's a lot of what we continue to focus on at Wristsponsible too, of providing the resources needed to be able to raise funds and awareness for a particular SDG initiative. So that's something that if people are interested in partnering, we've got physical and digital assets to help define that initiative, to then connect with the right partners to do a $5,000. Like we're doing a couple. One right now, we just did a $5,000 project supporting different coral reef restoration in the Florida Keys. And it's just sort of the resources provided to do that, as well as kind of the therapy of scuba diving. So as we raised the awareness for it, we defined the project, we got the funding for it, now we're implementing it and continuing to show the progress of what does having a clean reef and people who are doing it mean to the people that are receiving the impact. So projects are wide and vast, and we're interested in trying to help support all of them.
Wow, yeah, definitely. How can we know more information about that coral reef project that you're working on?
Yeah, the one that group is called Force Blue.
Okay.
They're an awesome organization. Jim Ritterhoff is the head guy's name. But yeah, forceblueteam.org is the name. But yeah, on top of that, recently we've got some other projects that we're supporting that have to do with, I'm a big believer in Blue Mind, which is the whole study about why humans are happier, healthier, more productive when we're on, in, near, and around water. That ties into the mental health, SDG 3, good health and well-being. And we're doing different surf therapy projects in actually your neck of the woods, Los Angeles, with the International Surf Therapy Organization. We've got some other initiatives like I talked about in Flint, Michigan, where we're doing point of entry water treatment systems. Also doing different things, raising educational awareness on water quality with using different comics. So the projects are super vast and broad, but as long as we really can define what the goal is and what the impact is, there's different crowdfunding and private sponsorship and selling wristbands that can help raise the awareness to buy those, to fund it, and rinse, repeat. And I think I'm more excited about doing 100 $1,000 projects as opposed to one $100,000 project. But again, every scope is different, and it just depends on what we're trying to do.
Right. 1 million projects.
Yeah. 1 billion.
1 billion. Actually, that's not that much these days.
Yeah, put some money into GameStop and Dogecoin, and you'll have that investment back in no time.
It's fine.
No, I'm kidding.
Thank you. So we like to add some fun to this podcast,
Yeah. Gotta smile and gotta have fun with it. Sometimes being an entrepreneur, I feel like I'm just like running into a wall, and sometimes I'm like, God, what the heck am I even doing? But then I have to take a step back and be like, you know what, 10 fingers, 10 toes. Got my dog, got my fiance, got sun's outside. It snowed 2 feet in Chicago the other day.
Beautiful.
Gotta have a smile. Actually, one of my favorite things I watch sometimes, if I'm ever questioning anything, I always watch the Jimmy Valvano speech. Which if you haven't, you should. He's a legend. But he talks about I think is a full day is when you laugh, you cry, and you do something nice for someone else. If you do all 3 of those things, that's a full day. And yeah, try and do that. Smile, have fun. Usually good things happen.
That's the wrap. No, I do have one question. I know that it's been wicked hard with this pandemic and what we've been doing recently with our kind of companies. It's hard to do the outreaches that we need to do, the in-person outreaches. So how have you combated that? How have you worked around this? What have you been doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think like most, it's just lots of FaceTiming on my computer, but it's a matter of how do we do that? And it's a crowded world of events now, crowded world of podcasts, crowded world of content on social media. So I think for us, just continuing to go as niche as possible. And for me, it's been content around the SDGs, and for us putting out volume of content, quantity of content, 2 podcasts a week around the different SDGs, 1 roundtable a month. This week we're doing gender equality. The end of the month, we're going to do on circular economy. Then we're going to do one on SDG 14, life below water. So just trying to continue to bring together really good thought leaders on panels and make it just an hour long. I think doing anything more than an hour is tough just because people got lives, they've got family, they've got friends, they've got dogs. Like hour you can handle, but more than an hour, it's like you better like have like a performance and something like that. Um, and then just trying to be active on social media. I've actually been really big on two other platforms that are maybe not as readily used, Twitter and Reddit.
Mm.
Um, the amount of activity on those two platforms is crazy. I mean, people I think often think Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, TikTok. I mean, those are all great platforms and I use them to some extent. But I think Twitter and Reddit have really surprised me as being two extremely active platforms for really good engagement to talk about stuff. And um, it's good to ask questions. It's good to listen. So that's kind of what we've been doing, and we'll continue to do that.
Yeah, perfect. Educate the community. That's just what we need right
Yeah,
now.
it's a lot of what you've been doing too. So I mean, in COVID, you got to pivot. If you didn't
Yep.
pivot, then you're just gonna sit there and complain about why everything else around you sucks. And it's like, yeah, it sucks for all of us, but do something about it. No one's gonna do anything for you, so figure it
Yep.
out.
Yep. And it's just been hard for everyone. So we know, take it easy on yourself. That's another thing I can just give business owner advice. Take it easy. It's okay that you can't accomplish something in this time.
Yeah,
You'll get to it, put it in your goals, still try to accomplish it, set little tasks, but just take it easy and don't be too hard on yourself. One last question, and then we will wrap up. What does a closed loop community look like to you personally?
just clarify. You say closed loop, you mean like a circular in terms of like
Circular,
Yeah,
circular economy, and just taking that linear system and making it a loop so that nothing goes in, nothing goes out that we're not using.
yeah, good question. I I actually was looking at like an icon just the other day that gave me, where was this? Sorry, I'm trying to pull it up. I guess I probably should have had this before you asked me the big question. But there, yeah, hold on, I got it here. Yeah, but for me, I think it's something that I've thought quite a bit about, especially as I've been reading this book called Donut Economics. I think it's by Kate Ralford. Um, but a lot of our like 20th century economics was focused on grow, 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 gross domestic product. But now it's a mindset of like shifting to the idea of the donut,
Mm,
where it's like trying to live in harmony and unison within the boundaries of what our Earth's resources can provide to the amount of people that live on this world.
mm,
So I think from going from changing the goal to not just grow, 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 but to trying to live in harmony with what the world allows us to do. I think the other thing that is like a big component is like how we ultimately distribute wealth and distribute, a lot of times like distribute money, but it's like we need to be more distributed by design in terms of how we're giving out not just money, but technology, enterprise, wealth, and really continue to empower those in need. I feel like a lot of our systems now, granted, there's been a lot of things messed up over time. And so you see redistributive economics and different handouts and coupons and things like that. But it has created a sense of dependency on people putting their handouts and waiting for handouts. So I think that's just like a fundamental flaw in the system. But I think probably even more so relevant to the question and to SDG 12, which I know is one that you live in, it's creating to regenerate, creating to be circular, and that nothing should ever be uh, raw materials, create, consume, throw away. That model, in a lot of ways, has been just the rise of convenience and consumerism, and just total degaff about what the world actually is capable of doing and our waste ability to recycle waste and whatnot. So I think thinking about how do we reuse every single thing that's in the supply chain, and I think there's a lot of creativity on how we can use one stot of waste as an input for something else. So those are kind of a couple different things, as well as I think we also just need to consider, just kind of being agnostic about what growth looks like. I
mm,
think a lot of times we think you must, and I've always been marveled at this when you see Wall Street and different companies are like, they expected to grow 12% this year and they only grew 9%. Like, oh man, like they really need to figure it out. And I'm just like, but they grew like double digits the year before that and the year before that, and they basically grew in their double digits. It's like, how much growth do we really need?
Mm.
And a lot of you see companies that are just focused on the bottom line, and I think we just need to change our perception of what growth is. And I think a lot of times you see people thinking that happiness is to have all the things, but it's not. I mean, and I think if we continue that mindset, we're going to be in trouble when it comes to thinking about the long-term longevity of our earth. And I at times feel a little pessimistic and defeated about where we are, where we're going. But I think that is outweighed by my optimism, and that I know I believe in humans. I believe in good people. I do believe in our ability to make progress. But it's not just going to happen with the continued status quo models, and we do need to massively rethink the way we approach everything.
Yeah, production in a whole.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
So I feel the same way. Sometimes it's hard not to get cynical in our line of work. We see both sides. We see what people are doing to the planet, and then we see what people are trying to solve. So it's a beautiful balance of both that we are seeing in our field, but we just need to outweigh that. So we're constantly fighting to outweigh the bad in our line of work. So let's just keep it positive and we
Hey,
do this
fired up.
together.
Yeah, there's nothing we can't do. I mean, it's sort of cliche. It's like if you put your mind to it, you can do it. And
Yeah,
I do believe that's true. I mean, this is definitely a lot of the stuff we're talking about is a road less traveled, and it's definitely harder to accomplish stuff that hasn't been done before. It's harder to do things that are new. But that's what we need more of. We need to think outside the box. We need to disrupt the status quo. And I challenge everyone listening and part of your community to, stand out from the pack, do different stuff. I mean, if you want to separate, you got to do things differently.
100%. Yep. Well, that is Kevin from Wristsponsible, everybody, and SDG Talks. He is fantastic. Thank you so much for all of this information and just talking with us. This is what it's all about.
Hey, anytime. Talk about it Tuesday. Talk about it every day of the week. I love it all, and your community is awesome. The work you've been doing with Recycle the Riches is really incredible, and I love seeing from where it started, where it is now, and really excited about where it's going.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to have you. And thank you for all of your knowledge and help over the past 5 years of us.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Have an amazing rest of your day.
You too.